It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. After Donald Trump's dramatic decision to pause all military aid to Ukraine, tonight, a peace offering from Kyiv. Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he regrets hostile scenes in the White House and is ready to return to the negotiating table. A very dumb thing to do, Canada's verdict after global stocks plunge over new Trump tariffs. Plus,
people in total darkness and isolation, spending most of their days locked in rooms with no light.
Electrocuted, beaten and left to die, we go inside Bangladesh's secret torture cells, allegedly used by the ousted regime to suppress dissent. And
this feels like a new chapter that I'm so excited that I get to share.
The Sussex rebrand and why it could be a make-or-break moment for Prince Harry and Meghan. And we'll also take a look at tomorrow's front pages. That is coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. First, there was that bitter personal row in the White House. Then, overnight, an unexpected decision by the US president to pause all military aid to Ukraine. Now, Ukraine's leader has made his strongest attempt yet to diffuse tensions with Donald Trump. Volodymyr Zelenskyy says the clashes in the Oval Office were regrettable, that he is ready to release Russian prisoners of war, to stop long-range drone and missile strikes, and to declare an immediate truce at sea, but only if Russia does the same. Sky security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports now from Kyiv.
Ukrainian troops on the front line with American-supplied weapons. Vital support to combat Russia's war. It's why a decision by Donald Trump to pause all military aid following a bust-up with Ukraine's president has sent shockwaves across the country. And perhaps prompted Volodymyr Zelenskyy to offer an olive branch.
We seek constructive cooperation, a relationship built on trust. What's happened at the White House instead of our planned negotiations is regrettable, but we must find the strength to move forward.
The president also used a post on social media to say, "We're ready to work fast to end the war, and the first stages could be the release of prisoners and a truce in the sky, a ban on missiles, long-range drones, bombs on energy and other civilian infrastructure, and a truce in the sea immediately if Russia will do the same." Ukraine's Prime Minister hoping diplomacy will diffuse the drama, with expectations growing that Ukraine and the US will sign a key minerals deal.
We are ready to sign the prepared agreement on the establishment of the investment fund in order to begin cooperation with the United States on a fully pragmatic and economic basis. This agreement has been approved by the government of Ukraine.
The American Vice President also sounding optimistic.
I think the president is still committed to the mineral deal. I think we've heard some positive things, but not yet, of course, the signature from our friends in Ukraine.
In Russia, there was enthusiasm for any stopping of US military support for Ukraine. Unclear, though, how Moscow will react to signs Kyiv and Washington might be mending ties. Ukraine's government clearly believes it can still make a deal with Donald Trump, switch back on that military support and go some way towards rebuilding ties. But trust has fundamentally broken down amongst ordinary people who question whether America is still on their side.
Right now, it feels like we are stopped in our back, and yep. I think it's some kind of treasury.
The most disturbing thing is that it sounds very unfair, because we are victims.
Yet still standing strong. Despite this new era, of even greater uncertainty.
Well, Deborah joins me now from the Ukrainian capital. This is very serious for Ukraine, Deborah. Is it a tense wait now to see if that olive branch has worked?
Yes, it is. And actually, the Prime Minister was asked a number of times at a press conference today what the effect is going to be on the front line of this decision by Donald Trump to stop the flow of military aid. He said that the Ukrainians have gone a long way to try to bolster their own production, say that they now make 30% of their own weapons here and are raising that to 50%. They've obviously got European supplies, but he made the point that the American aid in particular is at more of the high-end sort of things, the air defence systems that can protect the skies from Russian ballistic missiles. That is a real risk if the ammunition for the Patriot systems were to stop. Of course, there is this hope still on the Ukrainian side that they can maybe get the relationship back on track. There's obviously a lot of work going on to try to get this minerals deal, the framework agreement at least, signed. But until the signature happens, it's not there. The relationship has had a big hammering over the last few days. And as I was saying in my report just then, there's been a fundamental breakdown of trust amongst people who really are worried that does America have their back anymore, or are they actually more aligned with Russia?
Deborah, updating us there from Kyiv. Thank you. We are in an era of rearmament. That's what the EU Commissioner said today as she announced a 5-point plan to raise 800 billion euros to defend the continent. Europe moved quickly because it could not contemplate the alternative and because of the sheer amount of military aid supplied by the United States. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has this assessment.
A pause on military aid. But what exactly is being paused? Well, this is what the US has allocated Ukraine since the start of the war. Things like heavy weapons, artillery, tanks, huge amounts of those. 10,000, according to the data from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, although only slightly more than 1,000 have been publicly reported as delivered. We've also got portable defense systems. These are things like anti-tank weapons, the Javelin, originally granted to Ukraine by certain Donald J. Trump back in his first term. But the weapons that are already there, Ukraine will keep unless they're destroyed, and we can talk about that in a bit. But what is crucial is the ammunition for all of that, and running out of that is probably the most immediate concern. This is an area where Europe simply can't step up. It doesn't produce nearly as much as the US. When it comes to weapon systems themselves, well, here's how US aid compares to everyone else, and it has the edge in crucial areas. Howitzers, 126 of those delivered by the US compared to 26 from other countries. It's a bit more even when it comes to multiple rocket launch systems in terms of US compared to other deliveries. Then you've got things like mobile radar. Again, US has an edge in delivering those. And finally, armoured personnel carriers, 200 from the US, more than 200 from the rest of the world. Now, a pause in aid doesn't mean Ukraine will stop using that donated equipment. It might mean, though, that it doesn't get replaced, depending on whether a pause becomes a lull, becomes a definite end. And that could be important. If you look at the losses that Ukraine has suffered, these are confirmed losses. Something like armoured personnel carriers, they may have had over 400 delivered worldwide. Nearly 3/4 of those have been destroyed. This fight is, of course, ongoing. This video taken in the last few days from the Russian town of Sudza, which is currently occupied Ukraine, shows donated equipment being put out of action. And if you look at this, well, this is the picture of equipment lost just in the 6 weeks since Trump's inauguration. You've got a lot. 73 APCs, 57 tanks. You've got naval ships, artillery. These losses will start to bite if there are no replacements. It remains unclear if the US plans to withdraw Ukraine's access to Starlink, the satellite communication system owned by Elon Musk that's been crucial to Ukrainian endeavours. So the question becomes, could the EU, Europe, step up in terms of aid? And there are a lot of incorrect numbers being thrown around, including by the US president, but we want to focus just on this here. Here's what the US has given. You can see military aid in red, you've got financial aid in yellow, and then humanitarian aid on top. And here is what the EU has given. They would have to more than double their contribution to make up that shortfall. And you can see just how feasible that is or is not. So for all the talk of European funds and a generational moment to rearm, it is the US who's been providing the flow of aid and funds in this year. And that's why a pause is so consequential for Ukraine.
Well, after Donald Trump made his announcement, his vice president took to the airwaves to defend it. J.D. Vance disparaged the demand for a security guarantee and said Europe's peacekeeping force would be made up of 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. That drew strong criticism here. Well, let's go live to Downing Street then, and our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue. He's spoken again, hasn't he? But what's been the response to those comments from the Vice President?
Yeah, he has. He said it wasn't the UK he was talking about, but of course the UK and France are the two countries that have committed peacekeeping troops. As for the response, as you ask, there has been a backlash, most surprisingly perhaps from Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, ally of course of Donald Trump, who said his comments were wrong. Johnny Mercer, former Veterans Minister, has called J.D. Vance a clown. The Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartledge, has said he's been disrespectful, at odds with Kemi Badenoch, his party leader, who's urged people not to get carried away. So not a totally consistent message at the top of the Conservative Party. As for the top of government, well, they've been very careful not to talk about J.D. Vance's words. But we know that the Prime Minister has spoken to President Zelenskyy this evening. He has reiterated their shared goal of securing a long-lasting peace as Keir Starmer continues to try to navigate that very tricky path between the US and Europe.
Ali, in Downing Street, thank you. We're staying in North America, and the war of words over tariffs intensified today as Donald Trump and Canada's Justin Trudeau traded insults while stock markets sank. US importers now face 25% duties on goods brought in from Mexico and Canada. Taxes on Chinese imports have doubled to 20%.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has this analysis of the tariffs' impact.
Why are tariffs such a big deal? Let me give you a sense of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow a component as it's manufactured. Actually, it's a component that goes into a car, but it's a component of a component because it's a piston that goes inside an engine in a car that's made in North America. And right now, here's the journey it takes. It starts off here in Michigan. So in Michigan is where the raw aluminium that's going to become part of that piston is then shipped across the border, that's key here, across the border into Ontario. So in Ontario, it's cast into a piston, and then it goes back to Michigan again, OK? And at that point, when it's in Michigan, it needs to go down to Mexico because it needs to be finished, and it's finished in a factory in Mexico. So it goes all the way down there, across the border, into Mexico. But the journey's not over yet because at that point, it needs to go back across into Wisconsin and then Michigan, where it's assembled. It's assembled into an engine. And at that point, from Michigan, it goes again across the border into Ontario. And that is where it basically becomes part of a car. So it's assembled into the car, and the car at that point is basically a finished product, and that's shipped over to the US. It's one example. Deep breath here. But if you kind of totted this up, you might have come to the conclusion that, look, we're talking about 6 border crossings of that component. And right now, those border crossings in and out of the US are tariff-free, OK? And this is a free trade zone. If you're imposing tariffs on all of those border crossings, that will tot up. It will be a very big deal indeed because it raises the cost. And that is a really big deal when it comes in particular to automotives. These bars are basically just showing you how much of each different category of import into the US is coming from Mexico, from Canada, from China, of course, which are the affected countries here. And with automotives, you're talking about over 50%. Over 50% of all the vehicle imports, but also the components as well, come from these places. A lot of it from Mexico. You can see the green there. Look at energy. Over 60, well, it's actually around 60% is from these areas. Imports, most of that from Canada. And overall, you're talking about 40% of all imports. So it's an enormous, enormous amount of imports. Imagine Brexit in the UK. So it's similar. You've got a free trade zone. We never actually impose tariffs. Tariffs here on any of these goods are going to push up prices. And of course, the extent to which they get pushed up depends on precisely how long these tariffs are in place for and how severe they are. This is showing you historically, so going back to the 1800s, just how high the average tariff rate was in the US. The famous example here, the 1930s Smoot-Hawley famous set of tariffs. Some say they contributed to the Great Depression. That was really high. What we're talking about here, it's not quite as high as that, but certainly the highest since the 1940s. So really historic levels. And the upshot of all of that is, as well as it meaning higher inflation, because the cost of goods potentially go up, it means less activity. And this is a kind of measure of just how much activity there is in the economy in recent years. And the higher this line is, the more activity there is. Look at this. Just recently, in the last few days, the expectation is that the US economy is shrinking by 2.8% in the first quarter. A lot of people will look at that and say, listen, this is part of the implication of tariffs, but also broader concern about US economic policy.
Ed Conway with his assessment there. So let's bring in David Blevins, who's at the White House for us. Tumultuous times indeed, David, withdrawing of military aid, imposing tariffs, all part of the Donald Trump negotiating playbook. He is giving an address to Congress tonight, his first since returning to power. So what can we expect to hear from him?
Well, Anna, I think we can anticipate a glowing self-appraisal of his first 6 weeks back in the White House. Donald Trump is likely to defend his policy on immigration, on cutting federal spending and imposing those tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China, although we are now hearing from his Commerce Secretary that he could roll back on the imposition of those tariffs by as early as tomorrow. So something might be shifting there. It has certainly shifted on the question of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelenskyy Zelensky's expression of regret, his apparent willingness to now sign the rare earth minerals deal and to at least talk about the terms of a ceasefire for the first time, take us full circle back to last Friday and that extraordinary showdown here in the West Wing when that deal was supposed to be signed. Donald Trump wants it to be signed today so that he can talk about it tonight. But whatever he talks about tonight, we have witnessed the most significant shift in US foreign policy in 80 years. America seemingly moving closer to Russia, further away from Europe in what has been a tumultuous 5 days in global politics. It's going to be a very busy night on Capitol Hill. We'll bring you President Trump's speech to Congress from 2 a.m. UK time.
Well worth staying up for. David, live for us there at the White House. Thank you. Well, to Bangladesh now, where prosecutors allege that political opponents of the ousted former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina were abducted, blindfolded and left in darkness and repeatedly tortured. Well, that government and the Prime Minister who led it, Sheikh Hasina, were toppled last August. Her downfall gathered pace a month earlier when students protested against job quotas seen as a corrupt system to dole out plum government jobs. Well, the ferocity of the responding crackdown and the deaths of protesters resulted in spiralling violence. But the demonstrations only widened and up to 1,400 people were killed. Sheikh Hasina quit, fled to India as the crowds closed in. A caretaker government took over and Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal issued an arrest warrant for Hasina, accusing her of overseeing hundreds of secret prisons. Our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch, gained exclusive access to one of the sides and sent this report.
We're about to show you inside a secret network of underground prisons in Bangladesh.
This is one of the cells.
Cramped, windowless rooms where detainees were allegedly interrogated and tortured, all under the banner of a war on terror.
Save me from this danger.
Save me from this danger.
Yeah.
You get a really powerful sense here of just how claustrophobic it must have felt. People in total darkness and isolation, spending most of their days locked in rooms with no light.
You can see the legacy of interrogation. Detainees allegedly strapped into this chair and spun at high speed. Others were hung from the ceiling. Prosecutors are now trying to charge the ousted former leader, Sheikh Hasina, with crimes against humanity. She claims she's being politically persecuted.
We have interviewed some of the perpetrators, the commanders of the different disciplined forces, and they have stated that they did everything as per the order of the Prime Minister.
Investigators claim she used it to crush political opponents. Indigenous rights activist Michael Chakma didn't see sunlight for more than 5 years in detention. Then suddenly he was freed into a forest, blindfolded.
Then after untie my eyes, then I saw the world again after 4 months.
But hundreds of families are still waiting for news. Sanjida's brother, Shah disappeared in 2013.
How challenging has this long wait for news been for you?
If he's not alive, then where they have thrown him, I don't know that place, to go and pray. So it is heavier for us, heavier for each of us who lost their family members.
Forensic evidence is hard to come by. Whistleblowers say some victims were thrown into Bangladesh's waterways.
This is the Buriganga River, where victims who'd allegedly been shot dead were dumped, their bodies tied to cement bags to make them sink, and their families never told what had happened to them.
Their lives still in limbo, still desperate for answers, still praying for justice. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Bangladesh.
And you can watch the full version of Cordelia's report by scanning the QR code on your screen now. The backlog of cases in Crown courts is at unmanageable levels and is actively harming victims. That is according to a damning report by the Victims Commissioner for England and Wales, Baroness Newlove. The Ministry of Justice says it will increase court sittings until the system fully protects victims. But that hasn't happened soon enough for one survivor who waited more than 10 years for her case to be heard. Sky's Ashna Huranak has more.
On average, survivors of rape wait 710 days to get to the end of their trial. But imagine waiting a decade.
The victims are not supported in any way. You're at risk until they're put in jail. You're at risk until you come to trial.
Bella, whose name we've changed, reported her former partner to police in 2014. He was charged 8 years later with a catalogue of offences, including rape, sexual assault and coercive control. The trial eventually went ahead last year.
It really affected my mental health. It cost me many jobs because I couldn't go to work when decisions were being made with the police. It affected me in ways where I just couldn't cope. They changed the police officers who I had trust in. It affected me in so many ways.
What would you say to someone who is listening to how long it took your case to finally be resolved?
Don't give up. It nearly broke me a few times. My parents, my friends said to me, it's going to kill you. But the impact it's having on you mentally, you need to not give up, because you will get justice.
The extent of that debilitating wait for justice in England and Wales has been exposed in new research by the Victims Commissioner. Almost half of those, like Bella, have had their Crown Court trial dates rescheduled at least once, with many only finding out it's been cancelled the morning of. The backlog in the Crown Courts stands at 73,105, but Sky News has recently revealed the number of outstanding cases is likely closer to 80,000. The Commissioner says for victims and survivors, it's unbearable.
They have been re-traumatised by the very system that they thought they would protect them. And to actually know the length of time it's actually taken to get a court trial, to have to turn to alcohol, to have to turn to drugs as a coping mechanism, says everything about a system that is failing. You know, some were also self-harming and also some were suicidal.
Bella's abuser was found guilty of actual bodily harm and coercive control. For years, her life was on hold, waiting for this outcome. Only now can she begin her recovery. But there are thousands of others still waiting. Ashna Haranag, Sky News.
And if you have been affected by that story, you can contact the Samaritans at any time on 116123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Now, among the most desperate in Gaza are the seriously ill, with hospitals reduced to rubble and healthcare almost non-existent. The Jordanian government pledged to take 2,000 seriously ill children for treatment. Today, the first group of young patients arrived in the capital. Our Middle East correspondent Alex Deane travelled with them and sent this report from Amman.
The convoy crossed the border into Jordan late in the afternoon. The drive from Gaza had taken them through Israel, a country they've been at war with for almost a year and a half. Most of them have been travelling constantly, fleeing the fighting. But this, at last, was a journey to safety. 29 Gazan children and some of their families were evacuated in this first wave, many of them amputees needing specialist medical care.
Thank God we chose to come here so that my daughter can get treatment. Thank you and God bless you. My daughter has a cyst on the brain which causes her fits and she passes out.
The hospitals in Gaza have been bombed and mostly destroyed. They're barely functioning now.
They didn't get that in Gaza because there is no possibility to get that there. There is no hospitals. That means we accept they here to get the medical assistance here.
Naveen is 6 months old, born during the war with a heart defect. She is dangerously underweight too. They've lost their home and have been living in a tent. Her chances of survival, if she had stayed in Gaza, were not good.
It was difficult in Gaza. There was no treatment I could get for her. She was losing weight. She's now 6 months old and she hasn't put on even 1 kilogram in the last 6 months. And in the tents, my daughter got ill. She's suffering a lot.
Jordan has told President Trump that they don't support the forced eviction of Palestinians from Gaza, but they will take 2,000 sick children and their families for treatment.
So what happens now is they'll be taken to hospital in Amman for specialist medical treatment. Now, the Jordanians have been very clear. You know, this is a temporary evacuation. They will be free to go back to Gaza once they've had that medical care. This is not the permanent forced evacuation that Donald Trump was proposing. But they've all left family members behind in Gaza to come here, and they've left Gaza and a ceasefire that is hanging by a thread.
It's the first time Enes and her family have ever been out of Gaza. This is all they've arrived with, a few plastic bags of clothes. She's left behind everything to save her daughter. Tonight, Naveen is undergoing tests to see what surgery she might need. But she now has a chance of living. Alex Deane, Sky News, in Amman.
A court has heard that triple murderer Carl Clifford, the so-called crossbow killer, raped his ex-girlfriend before killing her in a violent act of spite. The 26-year-old has already pleaded guilty to murdering Louise Hunt, her sister Hannah and mother Carol in a crossbow and knife attack at the family home in July last year, but he denies the charge of rape. Farmers have staged a fourth protest against inheritance tax in front of Parliament today, calling it the Pancake Day rally. They came equipped with tractors and harvesters, despite a police ban on all tractors and mechanically propelled vehicles put in place after the last demonstration. Now, they've released podcasts and documentaries since stepping away from the royal family. Next up for the Duchess of Sussex is a new lifestyle and cooking show. With Love, Meghan is part of a $100 million deal with Netflix, which features a special guest appearance from Prince Harry. And as our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports, the couple and the streaming platform are hoping for a hit.
Welcome to Meghan's new life. Well, sort of, because this isn't her house. But it is her latest project, a lifestyle programme, part of their deal with Netflix. Some would say cheesy and saccharine. It doesn't feel like she's got her eyes on a cynical British audience.
We're going to need boxes.
No, I think we should bring that back.
But with the help of her friends, it feels like a reset. A happier, more upbeat Meghan, talking about her childhood and her family life now. It is worlds apart from their last very personal documentary. But there are nods to the past few years.
I just think that it felt really symbolic of saying to anyone, if you've been through something, you're not broken. It can be fixed, it can be sealed and healed at the same time.
5 years ago this week, Harry and Meghan were carrying out their final official royal engagements before moving to Canada. It hasn't been easy. Meghan's American Riviera brand, the one with the jams, had trademark troubles, so instead she's launched As Ever. There's also been problems with podcasts and other TV programmes. But talent manager Jonathan Shalit says there is an international audience that still wants to hear more from them.
For her to talk publicly, for him to be executives in companies wanting a royal association, he can get paid a lot of money, she can get paid a lot of money. So I think whatever their earning needs are, they can more than achieve that. Equally, if this show works, that's going to be a quicker way of achieving that. But I think this show will work. I've equally seen very positive reviews. If you Google some of the American press, they're very positive reviews.
Prince Harry only makes the briefest appearance on screen to support his wife.
This feels like a new chapter that I'm so excited that I get to share. And I've been able to learn from all of you. So just thank you for the love and support. And here we go, there's a business. All of that is just part of that creativity that I've missed so much.
With the subtle digs at the restrictions of royal life, it has given her this platform for a show that now financially has got to succeed. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the PR consultant, Alex Deane, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. Lovely to see both of you. Checking to see if Meghan's on the front, not of this paper. So among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. It's our lead story as well. Zelenskyy bows to Trump pressure. Their headline, more on that and plenty more in just a moment.
we are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories for this evening. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has told Donald Trump he is ready for peace and in a post on social media said the clash with the US president in the Oval Office was regrettable. Global stocks have plunged as US tariffs on goods from Mexico, China and Canada came into effect today. The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said they were a dumb thing to do. And the Duchess of Sussex's lifestyle series has premiered on Netflix. In the show entitled With Love, Meghan talks about her family's life in California and her love of food. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the PR consultant Alex Deane and the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman. Lovely to see both of you and welcome. So let us take a look at the front pages then, starting with the Daily Telegraph. Zelenskyy bows to Trump's pressure. That is their lead story. After the Ukrainian leader told Donald Trump he's now ready to talk peace with Russia, just as US military aid to his country has been paused. The Guardian quotes Mr. Zelenskyy as saying he now stands ready to work with Mr. Trump for a peace deal. Same pledge is also the top story for tomorrow's Times. We're ready for peace. The Daily Mail calls it an olive branch offered after a phone call with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. The Eye says that the UK is now scrambling to save a deal while Mr. Zelenskyy grovels to the US. The Metro focuses on the anger generated by remarks from the US Vice President J.D. Vance, dismissing the UK as a random country that hasn't fought a war for 30 or 40 years. The paper reminds him of the many times Britain has fought alongside America. The Express, too, reminds Mr. Vance of the 636 UK service personnel killed fighting alongside the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Star strikes an indignant tone on that story too, labels Mr. Vance J.D. dunce, complete with hat. And the worldwide market slump and its effects sparked by America's new tariffs on goods from China, Mexico and Canada is the top story for the Financial Times. And finally, The Sun has a story about the marriage problems of football pundit and former player Jermaine Genius. So, joined by Alex Deane and Jenny Kleeman. Last story aside, there's some big stuff to talk about tonight, isn't there?
Absolutely.
You know, it feels like your programme's sponsored by Donald Trump. The after effects are Donald Trump. So let's kick off. Jenny, Zelenskyy bows to Trump pressure. Big statement from him.
Yes, he kind of had to debase himself, really, and make that statement because Donald Trump wants an apology from him and he wants him to sign this minerals deal, and he does not want to provide any security guarantees. And, of course, there was the withdrawal of military aid, which was announced last night. Clearly came as a bit of a surprise to Sir Keir Starmer, who said in the Commons yesterday that he didn't think that that was in the offing. This was pretty much all that Zelenskyy could do. And Trumpism is the politics of naked self-interest. There is no moral imperative. There is no you are my ally. It is simply what is in it for us. And the problem with giving away support, military aid, pulling that, is that he's given away any leverage that he might have with Russia now. And so the debate at the moment is what is happening in terms of securing a peace, and Trump accusing Zelenskyy of not wanting peace. But the question is, how is this going to lead to peace? Because Vladimir Putin is probably rubbing his hands together and thinking, you know, why stop with the east of Ukraine. He might as well pursue more territory now because there is nothing left to kind of rein him in his ambitions in Ukraine.
Yes, so a strong, as you said, a strong Ukraine armed to the back teeth would have delivered a better deal against Russia. So who is advising Trump now? And are they saying, just cut your losses, get out, which is what Steve Bannon, his former chief of staff, or chief strategist, told us earlier this evening on Sky News.
Well, I think increasingly it does seem to be what the president himself thinks, and he's adopted an increasingly sort of pre-Second World War attitude about a pseudo McKinley-esque isolationism for the United States. But and it's to try and break through that Zelensky adopted the rhetoric that he did. Jenny is right. What else was he supposed to do? Even if willing, which is far from clear, Europe couldn't make up the shortfall offered by the withdrawal of American aid. And even if in time we got somewhere towards approaching it, it wouldn't help now, because this American freeze doesn't apply just to things that have been pledged. It applies to the supply chain, the pipeline, things that are sitting on the border now, awaiting delivery.
Poland, waiting to go across the border. I mean,
Correct.
people on social media last night were like, quickly get it over, but it's too late. The only problem is this might it be illegal because this was sanctioned by Congress. But anyway, I don't know if there's any legal recourse, but that's kind of not the point, isn't it?
First of all, you're right, it isn't. But second of all, that would only mean the material that is on the way rather than the newer stuff. Of course, bilateral agreements between countries like the United Kingdom, indeed Germany, who's the biggest European donor, mostly money rather than material, but those things can happen. People are doing imaginative things. The Norwegians are talking about pivoting their sovereign wealth fund and creating a huge amount of, no pun intended, pipeline of cash to support the Ukrainians. But no one else has the kit, as your report earlier tonight was making clear. Some of the things like the HIMARS that the Americans have deployed, which, 6 GPS-guided missiles, 70 kilometres in range, reload in under a minute. It's on wheels. It's an incredible piece of kit. The rest of the world supplied 3. The Americans have supplied more than 30. So you're at a 10x differential between American capabilities to deliver and our own. And there ain't no place that's coming from anytime soon that Europe could make up for it. So he did need to do this. Yeah. But it's pretty revolting that he had to. The scenes in the White House of bullying of Zelensky, I thought were made for exceptionally... For someone who's, believes in the transatlantic alliance, who believes in America as a force for good in the world, it made for very unappealing viewing.
Yes, and The Guardian has a picture of an attack today, a Russian drone attack hitting Odessa. Amid these efforts, Ukraine leader says he wants a deal, praises strong US Trump, thanked him specifically for the javelins, which is what he had said yesterday. I gave you javelins. So he's ticking the boxes in some respects. But why is it that the American right cannot see the benefits and the necessity of holding back an aggressor and defending a sovereign state, which is, if you remember, why George Bush Sr. went to war over Kuwait. I mean, it was about...
I think it's because they are thinking in a very short-termist way. They're thinking, why are we pouring all this money into a war very far away? You saw what happened when Zelensky tried to make the case to Donald Trump on Friday that Russia would be attacking the US next or getting close to the US. He was saying, don't tell us, what danger we're going to be in. Don't tell us we're in a great position. We're in a great position. The thing is, Donald Trump is a veteran of reality television, and he knows that where there is conflict, where there is drama, that's where the cameras are. And presenting a programme that comes out at 10 o'clock at night, there is a constant barrage with the time difference with the US of just more drama, drama, drama. And I think he wants to be seen to be taking control of the narrative in Ukraine. He knows that for a certain part of the American public, seeing a lot of money being poured into a war where they don't necessarily see where the US's skin in the game is because the geopolitics of it hasn't been properly explained, or they don't feel that they are properly part of this. They don't feel that they'll be next in the firing line if Putin is emboldened by winning in Ukraine. He just sees this as an opportunity to score points and get camera time. And unfortunately, Ukraine is paying the price.
Well, I mean, the biggest... I mean, we had one Ukrainian MP today say this has gone from disaster to catastrophe with the withdrawal of US military aid. The biggest disaster is that the splitting of the West, which plays right into Putin's hands. Has J.D. Vance also done that himself, which what appeared to be an insult to many people in this country?
Yes.
Talking about 20,000 troops from countries that have never fought a war for 30 to 40 years. The troops have been offered by Britain and France, who have stood alongside the US and had taken great losses in the wars of Afghanistan and Iraq.
We should mention J.D. Vance is at pains to stress today he didn't mean the UK or France. Well, it's hard to imagine who else he meant, given those are the two countries that said that we would offer forces.
The numbers of coalition of Europe who stood by in the war of Afghanistan after 9/11. It's a great long list.
I'm agreeing with you. I mean, it's... But the point is, he says, I didn't mean you, I meant someone else. He doesn't say who it was he meant. Britain isn't some obscure country that may or may not be able to act. Britain is a country that stood by the side of our American friends in conflict after conflict. And I deeply regret this sort of remark from the Vice President. But to return to the point you were just making about why does the right think this, or the far right, as you were putting it,
didn't say far right.
You didn't. I think Anna did.
I didn't say far right.
Oh, OK. Yeah. Why does the right think that they don't understand the imperative of supporting Ukraine or of the geopolitics of it? Wanting peace isn't wrong, right? And they are tapping into a vein of conscience in the United States, which has lost more people in the course of conflicts. If you think about conflicts in recent times, more Americans have someone in their family or know someone in their family who've lost people in the course of armed conflict.
Isn't it about tax dollars going far away? Isn't that the problem?
That'll be part of it too, but I was making the point that wanting peace and not wanting to send young men to die in wars is not a bad instinct. The trouble is that sometimes brave men have to stand over you, willing to do harm to your enemies in order to preserve your peace. And I believe that's what's happening in Ukraine. I think it's an absolute imperative that Russia is defeated and can't behave in the way that it's allowed to. But in order to do that, you've got to explain to people why that's right and not permit Russia to bulldoze its way to victory in Ukraine. And the easiest thing to do is say it's a faraway country of which we know nothing. Let's just let things happen. There is one other potential here, which is Trump is bullying Zelenskyy into accepting a compromise, effectively. I'm going to do him down so that people will see me as a more fair dealer, not unconditionally wedded to Zelenskyy, and then he'll accept the compromise, which is giving away part of his country. Well, he shouldn't have to.
OK, we see the Daily Express. We remember these moments.
Yes.
The body is coming home. The UK has stood with America in its darkest hours. And, I don't know, presumably some of this is about Trump getting a Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know how the Nobel Peace Prize Committee feels about allies deserting, the friends they've supported. But anyway.
I think, at best, J.D. Vance's comments were incredibly ill-advised. But I think we've been living in this post-truth world for a really long time now, and I think perhaps too many people at the top of the US administration assume that that's where we permanently are, and they can just say things that are completely untrue.
I just hope he said something very dumb off the cuff. It's the most generous interpretation one can have.
Yeah. Both of you, stay there. Lots more stuff to come in the next part of our programme. We didn't even get to tariffs, which we will get to. And this story on the front of the Daily Mail as well. Meghan Markle's TV rebrand. What did you make of it? What do you think of it? Back in a moment.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Maitai village on the front line.
Firing to civilians and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free, wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
It's a Premier League weekend on NBC and Peacock. March 8, top four hopefuls, Aston Villa. Visit Brentford. Then March 9, it's a blockbuster battle. Arsenal.
That's done it! Just what Arsenal needed!
Visit bitter rivals, Manchester United. The Premier League weekend is on NBC and streaming on Peacock.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast. It's starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me once again, the PR consultant Alex Deane and the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman. Worth remembering that Donald Trump gives his address to Congress later on. In any other year, it would be called the State of the Union address, but not in inauguration year. He's got lots to talk about. So let's go to subject number 2, which is tariffs. Alex, front page of the Financial Times. Your take and the response here.
You've got to differentiate between the two kinds of tariffs he's talking about, or rather, they're two targets. Canada and Mexico, you can see potential short-term fixes. He's announced the things he's angry about with those countries. Canada, fentanyl, a scourge of drugs in the United States. Mexico, migration, failure to control the borders. If you do what I want more, maybe these tariffs will change. And indeed, his Commerce Secretary's indicated a willingness to be flexible. The Chinese tariffs that have been announced are different. There is a genuine, but then there's a more kind of understandable beef between the United States and China over tariffs. China does use forced labour. China does exploit other people's patented and sensitive technologies and use it without recourse to law. China does trade in illicit goods, and China does operate an enormous trade surplus with the US. All of these reasons are more legitimate causes to have tariff discussions, at least. But the trouble with that is it implies a long-term environment of tariffs between the United States and China. And if that's the case, if we're now moving to a new economic way of life, if you like, two things will happen, I think. The first is, because things become more expensive for everybody, it's inflationary. It drives up prices and it'll be bad for us too. And it's bad for the markets, it's bad to buy stuff. But the second thing that will almost certainly happen is China will retaliate. And retaliatory tariffs will trigger trade wars, not just between those two countries, but they'll have potential ramifications and encourage others to put their borders up too.
Yes.
For any free trader, bad, bad, bad.
Yes, although their retaliation so far has been soft, some would argue, and that is partly because
that's what I mean. They're waiting to see,
45% of their
real?
GDP comes from exports. So very quickly, because we've only got one more left, I do want to get to the last.
China has retaliated on agricultural goods, and we know that farmers are big supporters of Donald Trump, a large part of his base, so it will be interesting to see how that goes down. And also, we know a lot of people voted for Donald Trump because he promised to bring prices down, so we've got to see the consequence that this is going to have on prices in the US. It's unlikely to make them go down. If anything, it will make them go up.
I'm going to stay with you for the next one, because I know you've watched a bit.
I watched a bit on my way here, in the interests of journalistic endeavour, because I'm not the target audience for this.
Well, you might.
But I have to say, this is much anticipated, $100 million deal with Netflix. They have to make good on it, Meghan and Harry. Much anticipated and universally panned. And the problem is there are a lot of people who are
Did you not see the size of the cake?
Who are always going to hate whatever she does. So you can't necessarily trust the fact that Jan Moyer in the Daily Mail is being rude about her. However, I did watch some of it, and it is incredibly bland, incredibly boring, and incredibly insincere.
Hard to believe.
I know.
Oh, both of you. Alex, Jenny, thank you both. See you for more later. Here's the weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the next couple of days will be mostly settled, although the north will be wet and windy at times. Southern Britain will have a chilly start tomorrow, a widespread frost, freezing fog patches. Elsewhere, milder, cloudier, outbreaks of rain in the windy north. Early fog lifting through the morning to leave plenty of sunshine for England and Wales. The south and east of Ireland and northeast Scotland too look fine, but staying rather cloudy and windy with further patchy rain in the north.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.